Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you the third episode of a 4-part miniseries with former guest Steve Rees. Today, Virginia and Steve discuss how healing frequencies can inform what is sacred about our common design and bring chaos back into order. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Understanding the energy of chaos and the frequency of rest.
Yeah.
Energy. How do we understand the energy of chaos in the most practical way? And bring it into alignment with the frequency of rest. I ask myself these questions all the time.
Right.
How do I displace, because that's when I'm dealing with somebody with cancer, how do I displace the energy of chaos,
Cancer,
which is an insult, attacking their body in the most practical way, controlled by a myriad of other complex functions that's debilitating the body, with the frequency of rest? The most practical thing I have to access is I need to bring that person to some measure of understanding of really what is magnificent and incredible and sacred about their entire constitution, their spirit, their soul, their body. I need to tell them to understand what's sacred about this, the inner workings and the mechanics of this vessel, and the integrity of the other moving parts and their role, and not going rogue. Like your heart can't go here, your conscience here, your conscience can't be in the gutter, your heart in pursuing your dreams, and you being surrounded by a body of lying, and wonder why you have cancer and you're not healing. Like, no, there's these moving parts that have to be brought into integrity. When those two things happen, I notice that people start extending themselves grace and seeing, wait a minute, I've got a lot of natural resources to work with here to heal. And they start asking questions about God, about design, because then they start understanding not just the mechanics, but the design, the physiology, the anatomy. They start understanding physics and science and math, kind of like I did. Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. So a lot of the foundations that have eroded in their lives start kind of coming together. And I realize we displace a lot of ignorance. So a lot of the dumb things they do or did, and the stupidity sometimes from which they've lived or that they've embraced, all go because ignorance is not having information.
Right.
Being dumb, dumbfounded by something, is kind of acting like you do because you kind of have to wing it. But stupid is doubling down and acting like you have information that you don't have, that you've been dumbfounded by, but acting like you know what you're talking about. So those are, I often ask myself, wait, am I ignorant? Am I just dumbfounded by this? Or am I stupefied? And so it caused me to ponder those 3 questions. And I'll tell you, it cleared a lot of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in my own life. So then I thought, well, that's stepping into relational. We were made to be in relationship with our spirit, our soul, and our body, right? In the most practical way. If I'm dealing with cancer, I have to explain to people, this is where we got to find the fractures here in the communication. But for what sake? Because God made us to be like Him, spirit, soul, and body, to be in communion with Him. And that's why it says, we hear it said, and we all understand, hey, love your neighbor like you love yourself.
Right.
In other words, if you don't love yourself and see what's sacred about you, you can't have a concept of who God is or isn't. And so how are you supposed to love another person? So we can't come into wholeness until we heal. And I'll tell you, Steve, one of the reasons I've loved getting to know you is because we both work with very serious illness. And that's what that pilgrimage taught me, dealing with very sick people, that healing is accessible to 100% of the people that I worked with, always.
Yeah.
We don't chase a cure, we chase wholeness. And from pursuing that wholeness, that's where people go into remissions or they launch to go home. But either way, they're free.
Right. They make the choice.
Yeah.
And I kind of bouncing off what you were saying, to put it in musical terms, like this harp here, if I let it sit here for a couple of days and come back and try to play something, it wouldn't sound very good. I need to bring it back into order, as it were. And what is the order? Well, the order in musically is the frequencies, the tunes. So how do you do that? Well, you have to calibrate. You have to have some source that shows you where you're supposed to be, shows you how far you've strayed off from the path, and shows you where you need to come back to be on the path again. And then musically speaking, the note comes back to the frequency that it's supposed to be.
Number 7,
Numbers
repeated
chapter 7,
4 times.
Yeah, exactly. So that's musically saying the same thing as what you were saying, is that we have to have a source that gives us the sample to which we can come to.
The gauge,
The gauge, We have to have a
baseline or something.
Exactly. And you call it calibration or whatever. I remember hearing a story of the fellow that had a violin that was out of tune, and he lived way out in the middle of nowhere, but he asked a radio station if they would play the A note so that he could tune. So once he got that A note, then he was able to tune his violin.
It's not relative.
No,
to what I want, you want, or my opinion.
Yeah, there's an absolute, and that goes back to what I was talking about, the pattern. The designer makes a pattern, and the pattern is designed because that designer knows what works the best, because he made the design, and everything, all of the moving pieces of that design are meant to fulfill certain functions. And if we step out of that pattern, out of that design, out of that blueprint, out of whatever you want to call it, it then leads to that chaos, to that. And if we want to come back in, then we have to look at that pattern and say, oh, this is where I strayed off. This is what come.
I love it. I often talk about the era of grace, which is unmerited favor. And I think it's best explained by what you do with music. It's by these laws that are irrefutable. But we live in the age of rest.
Right.
Something happened 24 years ago that ushered in and restored and displaced the mass confusion, chaos, and dis-ease. And I think that can be explained also, bringing everything back into balance, harmony, and coherence, if we consent, if we agree.
Yeah.
If the inner workings of our conscience brings us in compliance with the teaching of this guy that only lived, by the way, to the age of 33, began his public ministry at 30. Yeah. So 3 years. 3 is a huge number for us. The numbers 3, 6, and 9.
You'll find it all through the ancient text as well. Yeah.
And I'm going to do a whole talk on why I believe the number 3 is the fingerprint of God in time.
Yeah.
And I even think about the first 10 words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What? Time, matter, space. And they're an amazing base, reference point to the Trinitarian constitution of all things.
Yeah.
That we can experience governance. And if one of those things are tweaked outside of an executive force, we believe it to be God, that set everything in motion, right?
Right.
The Dark Trinity would say, or in ancient manuscripts, they would say Baal, right? Baal was what we call God.
Right.
And the pagan practices of ancient times, since you brought David into all this. I mean, they worshipped Baal. That was similar to God. But then there is this wild other thing that we reference as a Holy Spirit. I think it's Ashtar or something like that, part of the dark trinity. That's the seductress.
Right.
But the Holy Spirit also seduces us, right? And then, of course, there's the practice of Moloch in ancient times, which was associated with death and fire, right? But what do we see? Jesus there. And he came and sacrificed, right? And with the worship of Moloch, if I understand correctly, is like the sacrifice of life, children, whatever. It's practiced in ancient times.
Yeah.
But I think if we're going to step into this place of rest, I do think it's important to see the Trinitarian. There's a lot of Satanists now, right? And emerging witches and everything. Well, this isn't new. It's not progressive and it's not new. We see this in ancient Babylon, right? And there's this just Trinitarian constitution of what we call the Godhead or whatever, the Trinity. And that created, designed, created, and spoke life into being. And then there's this other dark thing. You referenced it earlier in the form of the negative.
Truth of the twist.
The truth of the twist. But it's real, and it exists, and it was there,
it's
right? It's
patterned off for the true, but then it's a twist put into it to make it take it off track. Yeah.
And the beauty, I think, of our humanity is we have the capacity to choose. Do we reach for those resources that expand our life, explain, expand, and give us the basis of exploration to be wild because he put everything into motion? Or this other dark Trinitarian force that is there as well, because you never know where people are that are listening, but these are realities.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we're not comfortable speaking about spiritual things, but the reality is that much of what you and I have talked about over the course of days explains good and evil. And both are there for our taking.
Right.
I guess we get to choose.
We make choice. Yeah.
The choice is easy when you have cancer and the conversations I can have with people. I'm thankful for what you've shown me about energy and displacing chaos, because I see that when a person is fighting cancer and they're spending $10,000, $15,000 a week paying for their own cancer treatment, I've observed that often what they tell me is not what they feel, what they want.
What they think you want to hear.
Or they think they want. But it's when I'm able to energy test them. For example, we talked about this, a will to live. Just because you're spending the money for all these treatment doesn't mean you have a will to live.
Yeah, you might be trying to fulfill an expectation of somebody else. Yeah.
Or there's a secondary gain in being sick.
Yeah.
And that secondary gain is giving you relationship, conversation, and experiences you've always wanted.
Focus,
that you never had before. It's not always awful and evil. And by the way, many times people don't understand the disparity between what their vessel is telling me and what their heart is revealing.
The discord.
The discord. And the anatomy, by the way, of disease is the discord, the imbalance between what the body's holding on to and what people. So this concept of understanding energy in the context of chaos and understanding frequencies in the context of healing, I think is very important. It's a complicated conversation, but I hope people listening understand that as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. You're more complicated than you think. And there are laws of nature, things that are self-evident and will appeal to your natural affections, regardless of what Trinitarian constitution you live by, that of life in obedience to the creative order of things, or that of ancient practices where you're the master of your own destiny and you live by that. Either way, there's a path to rest wherever you land, wherever your camp is.
We have so many people that want to gift healing to their friends and family members. Due to popular request, we've officially created the Gift of Rest package for purchase. please go to theplaceofrest.com/wholeness packages to view the gift of rest. If you've been listening to our podcast regularly and are now wondering, what's next, or how can I get more support? Our Day of Rest course is available to support you in your pilgrimage. Use the promo code PODCAST, all lowercase, to receive a 10% discount for our introductory Day of Rest course. Now back to the show.
That's something of frequency that we call resonance as well. Probably the most classical illustration of that is that Memorex advertisement where there's a glass, a champagne glass, and this woman starts singing a note, and she pitches it to a certain point where the glass begins to shake, and then it bursts. Her voice hit the same frequency as the glass's resonant frequency, and it caused it to burst. There's been quite a few medical experiments based on that as well, as far as taking care of organisms and things like that. But when you take a look at that, so that's what you could call a destructive frequency. And if you consider the idea that if chaos is a destructive frequency and it's continuing to sound off in your life and it finds some resonant place in your life, that it begins to, it can destroy. And that's something to be considered, because if you find yourself in dis-ease, it's very likely that you have entered that place of resonant frequency with the negative, with that chaos.
And when people come and work with us, I have biofeedback technology, acoustic resonance technology, heart rate variability technology that helps us create a narrative around those disruptions.
Right, yeah.
Perhaps in closing, you can give us practical ideas instead of evaluating perhaps the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that we're dealing with, whether it's spiritually, physically, emotionally, in the context of relationships. Certainly we're experiencing this at state level, national level, political, global.
Yeah.
What are practical things that we can understand about energy, frequencies, and music that can bring us into alignment outside of just the regular narratives of circumstances?
Well, my thought on that is that, first of all, we have to actively choose what is going to place us into that rest. It's not going to happen by accident. And that's going to be everything from the music we listen to, from the TV we watch, from the sources of news or whatever, movies we watch, people that we associate with. You know, the old saying, birds of a feather flock together. You know, if you find yourself in the middle of chaos and you're taking a clear look at what's going on around you, and you find that that's not part of the pattern you want to follow, you're going to have to make some choices. And those choices are going to have to be deliberate. And in the middle of those choices, you can reset your compass, as it were. You know, it's interesting. I used to do a lot of sailing, and every once in a while you have to take your compass in and have it recalibrated, because it will get off after a while.
Everything needs to be recalibrated.
Yeah.
Huh?
And so there has to be some point that you can trust that's steering you in the right direction. And once you know what that point is, then you're going to have to make some personal, sometimes tough decisions that are going to change your lifestyle, so that you're not continuing down that track of chaos. You're actually shifting over to that track of rest. And that's something that it's going to be different for each person. I can't tell you what it's going to be for you. You can't tell what's going to be for me. But we can listen to each other, and we can help each other be honest with each other. And I think that's the heart of what you're doing.
We get really practical.
Yeah.
We get into the science of it.
Yeah.
You've gone from the science of healing into really the art of healing.
Yeah.
And I kind of went more from the art of healing, which was photography. My work was published extensively nationally and all over the world. From that, I'm kind of going back to the heart of the science.
So I feel like my music is a tool for making that change. And I have many people that write and tell me exactly that in their lives. And then I think your program of rest is another tool that people can engage to find that rest. Mm-hmm. So it's their companions, and the world is looking for it.
Well, at the end of the day, it's like we were talking about earlier, when you have a 12-year-old that's suicidal, right. When your husband just walked out on you and you all of a sudden lost your primary source of income, when your child passed away from a heroin overdose. Right. These are very practical, tangible things where people just don't know what to do.
What next? Yeah.
And they don't understand what's next. They don't even know how they can breathe.
Right.
So I am in a position where I have to come at this from all angles, not just one. However, I will say that your calming harp music that is on Spotify and it's on YouTube, and I know you have millions of followers all over the world, I do think that it's healing. And every single one of my clients, every single one of my patients is listening to your work. So, because it's doing for them as I teach them to abide a little bit and pause and process, this is doing for them what they can't do for themselves.
Right, yeah.
Not to mention, sometimes we don't have the capacity to read a scripture, read a psalm, and digest it. But with your music, they're hearing it, even if they can't read it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that
displaces that negative energy.
And that's the thing. I find that a lot of people will write to me about, and it amazes me because they say they play the music in their home all day long. And they say because they're doing that, the whole atmosphere changes.
I always say thoughts have power, but words have authority. Mm. And the resonance, because they all have a frequency, they have a resonance. Right. Hidden Messages in Water proves that. His research proves that. And so your music gives substance to that, and that's the story.
And I think there's just one more aspect about what I'm doing with the music is that it is coming out of the Psalms. Mm-hmm. So there actually are words associated with the chords that I'm playing. And even though you're not hearing the words, you're hearing the music of the words, which one person said, it's like the words are flying past me, So I think there's an extra dimension that's going on there that I didn't even understand.
It's mass.
At first.
It's what Einstein said. It's energy.
Yeah.
Energy has form, and whatever way it presents itself, it has form. It's somebody very near and dear to my heart. One of my old patients who became a friend, who became an advisor to our foundation, passed away. And it was an amazing thing. He passed away here. I had the privilege of watching him launch at 3:30 in the morning. And it was an amazing thing to witness. And I never get tired of watching people leave time because mass substance leaves. And you know it the second it's happening. Mm-hmm. It happens. You watch it happen. Yeah. It's not the heart. It's not the organs. It's not this. It's when that mass, that breath of life, which also the spirit is the breath, is like a breath. Well, it's like the wind, right? Mass, exactly. Right, it goes, you know it. Yeah. So energy, frequencies, resonance, pay attention to those things. Right. It's fruitful. It's meaningful. It's important to pay attention to those things.
It has more meaning in your life than you would ever believe.
Thank you.
For updates about rest in this podcast, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of Rest. If you would like more information about Virginia or to support enjoying the cause of rest, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.